Good afternoon. I am Tony Perkins. I'm president of FRC Action and FRC Action PAC. We're, along with FRC and a host of other organizations, sponsoring Values Voter Summit. The straw poll is an FRC Action initiative. We pass out the results. I'll hit the high notes, and they'll be happy to take questions from credentialed media. As I just announced in the general session, Ted Cruz won this year's straw poll with 25% of the vote, followed by Dr. Ben Carson with 20%, Governor Mike Huckabee coming in third with 12%, and then fourth place went to Senator Rick Santorum, and then tying for fifth place was Governor Bobby Jindal and Rand Paul. All of those candidates, with the exception of Ben Carson, were here this weekend. And then, of course, you see the rundown on the vice presidential candidates. The issue set, interesting, but not surprising given the topics that were discussed here this weekend, and one that I think is at the forefront of people's minds: religious liberty, capturing almost 40% of attendees who were voting in this straw poll as their number one issue, followed by the life issue with 24%, nearly a quarter, and then protecting natural marriage. 16% of those in attendance saying that was a top issue. The turnout this year, we had actually an increase over last year in those who were eligible to participate in the straw poll. We had those eligible to vote, nearly 1,900 registered here at the Values Voter Summit, that about 100 over last year's attendance. And that's actually a record for a pre-primary year. Usually our high points have been in the years going into Republican primaries, where we've had a spike in attendance. So this is, it actually shows some things, that there is more engagement of core conservatives in the process when they have a reason to be. It's counter to what we're seeing with the kind of deflated participation in some places of voters in some of these Republican primaries, and even the enthusiasm deficit we've talked about. I think the evidence here is quite clear that when conservatives have someone who will speak clearly, concisely, a conservative message that embraces all elements of conservatism, they gain enthusiastic support. And I think that is the message for the candidates. If you want to support a Value Voters Summit, hey, just tell it like it is, have the record to back it up, and don't equivocate on your stands, and you'll get our support. And I think that is the pathway forward for the GOP if they want to win elections. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
In the poll, could someone vote the same person for president and vice president, or
they could? They can make their selection if they want to. Their top choice for president and their top choice for vice president. If they want the same person to hold both offices, they could vote that way. But yes, they could.
And how did the issues ranking, how did that compare to previous years?
The religious liberty issue, I think, was by and far much higher this year than it has in the past. I don't have that data off the top of my head, but I do know that it has fluctuated with issues such as government spending and Obamacare being higher in the issues. And again, I think it's what's being discussed nationally as well as what's being discussed here at the Values Voter Summit. Although I will say that national security has been a very prominent issue discussed here this weekend, but even so, religious liberty topped out as the number one issue. I do think that candidates need to take note of that. That is a very prominent issue. We've seen it. It's a part of the Obamacare. It's really a primary issue given many of the policies of this administration. Yes?
There was a time when Governor Huckabee did very, very well here. I think he won once, he finished second twice. He's fallen down. Do you have any sense for why he isn't getting the kind of support that he's had here in the past?
I wouldn't read too much into that. I think he still got a very enthusiastic reception. He finished third in the straw poll, which I think if you place really anywhere in the top 5 or 6, that you're a contender for the Value Voter vote. And I think the straw poll is instructive. It shows us what people are looking for in candidates. And I'll have to say, all of the candidates that actually finished in the top 6 slots are candidates, or I should not say candidates, they are individuals who speak very clearly and are not afraid to challenge the political establishment. So I see no negatives in finishing and not finishing in first. I think Ted Cruz is riding the wave, and I think he clearly is one that is known for speaking his mind, saying what he means, and he means what he says, and I think the voters are responding to that.
Yeah. Could you speak to why Chris Christie and Jeb Bush weren't invited? And I'd also love to get your thoughts on how Hillary Clinton managed to get 1 vote in that straw poll.
I could put Mickey Mouse on, and he probably would have got a vote too. I think well, let me first address the issue of Jeb Bush and Chris Christie. This is, as I pointed out earlier, this is a really high turnout for us historically. I mean, this is a high watermark for us in terms of attendance in a year that we're not going into a presidential election. We did not invite all individuals who may or may not be candidates for the Republican nomination. This is the Values Voters Summit, and we want to put forward before those who come from across the country to be here and invest time and money, people that they connect with, that will energize them, will get them to go back home and affect the outcome of local elections, state elections, and national elections. So for that reason, we didn't invite everybody. In fact, we did not have enough speaking slots for people who wanted to come and be here. I had to make some difficult choices of turning down some members of Congress who wanted to come and speak, who are friends, who are fighting for the issues we care about, but quite frankly, we just didn't have enough space.
So what was it about Chris Christie and Jeb Bush that you thought wouldn't energize voters back home?
Well, I don't think they're not necessarily out there out front that conservatives identify with. I mean, Chris Christie is not. Unless I've missed something, I don't think he's the standard bearer for the conservative movement. Not to say if both of them are contenders or want to be contenders, we will invite them next year to the Values Voters Summit, just as we did Rudy Giuliani a few years ago. We had him speak at the Values Voters Summit when he was making his way toward being a candidate. So we'll be happy when the time is right to invite all of those who want to make their case as to why they should be the Republican nominee for president to the Values Voters.
And I was kind of joking about Hillary, but I'd love to get your thoughts on her strength as a candidate, and generally how the evangelical movement views her candidacy.
I think she's going to have a more difficult time if she is a candidate or is a prospective candidate. She's going to have a more difficult time this go around than she did last time. I think her position as the Secretary of State, I think the issue of Benghazi will continue to be a shadow over her candidacy. I think what she championed as Secretary of State, religious liberty, has slipped as a priority at the at the Department of State, and that didn't happen just when John Kerry came in. She preceded that in moving a more of the liberal domestic agenda that this president has pursued, including that in their foreign policy. I think that agenda is in complete contrast to the values issues, religious liberty issues that value voters care about. Yes?
What's necessary for social conservatives to make social issues like gay marriage, religious liberty issue, major campaign issues in the next presidential campaign?
That's a great question. What is it going to take for us to make our values voters to make these issues prominent in the next presidential campaign? Well, you're actually seeing part of it right here. That is a part of what the Values Voter Summit is about. It's about bringing value voters together and expressing what is of priority to them. And again, I think this shows what they're looking for in a candidate. And I think I can say fairly safely that social conservatives are not looking for a candidate who will solely talk about social issues or go out and just campaign on the preservation of natural marriage. But what they are looking for is a candidate who is strong on national defense, who understands the power of free economies, and also has a solid foundation on the moral and the political issues, and will not run from those issues or be embarrassed about those issues. As you saw here this weekend, I mean, that's Ted Cruz came out on the stage, talked about that. Mike Huckabee talked about that. Governor Jindal talked about that. Rand Paul even put forth that pro-life position. And so I think that has to be done in a consistent and convincing way, and it has to be a part of their political portfolio. Now, how is this going to work its way into the elections? I think in part there's going to have to be a realization that a Republican nominee is not going to be successful without the base of the party. Now, if it takes us more than 2 election cycles to discover that, we're in bad shape. Because that's what happened in 2008, it's what happened in 2012. I pray that it doesn't happen in 2016. Anyone else? Yes?
Governor Romney came here several times, was given a polite and welcome, but didn't connect with the audience the way that, say, Ted Cruz did. What does Ted Cruz bring to value voters that Mitt Romney wasn't able to do?
Cowboy boots. I think it's a couple of things. I think Mitt Romney, I personally, I mean, after, I was not my first choice, but once he was the nominee, I probably campaigned harder for him in 2012 than I did for George Bush's reelection in 2004. And that was not to take anything away from George Bush. It was just the fact that I knew that this nation could not withstand another 4 years of Barack Obama. And I personally was convinced of Mitt Romney's positions. I know some were not, but I had spent enough time with him. I was convinced that he was pro-life, he was going to be pro-marriage, that he would be pro-family, and I liked him personally. However, his record was something that followed him, and his positions that he took earlier in his political career, people were not convinced that those positions were genuine, and he did not emphasize those issues during his campaign. Therefore, people were simply left with the past, and he was not able to overcome that. And that was by calculation by the political consultants that basically said you need to reach the middle. The base has nowhere else to go. They will vote for you. That's not speculation. That was told to me by some of the political consultants surrounding this campaign. Post-election analysis showed that they did have somewhere to go. In the backyard to cut the grass or something else because they didn't show up to vote for him. The Republicans will get the same outcome if they do the same thing again in 2016. I just think they've got to have a candidate who has both the record and has the clear message that puts the two together and connects with the values voters. And again, the finalists that you saw today in the straw poll are all men that do that.
But Ted Cruz seems to speak it as a first language.
It's naturally. I mean, if you heard him tell his testimony, he's grown up in the evangelical community, and he knows how to connect with them. But Mike Huckabee does as well, and so does Bobby Jindal is learning to do that as well. And Ben Carson, who was not here this year, was here last year, has been speaking around the country, and has actually been at a few of our events, and he gets it, and he communicates it, and he speaks very clearly. So there is a common denominator that we see in these finalists in the straw poll. They are all individuals who do not have nuanced, politically correct statements. They are giving an accurate diagnosis of where America is and what it's going to take to get America whole again. Yeah.
Going back to those top 3 issues, when you look at those three, my assessment is that the pro-life movement is winning, the defensive marriage movement is losing, and religious freedom is a bit of a mixed bag. Well, why do you think those are heading in different directions like that?
Restate your question. I'm not sure I get you.
Well, I'll put it more simply. Why is the pro-life movement winning, but the defensive marriage movement losing?
You're not making reference to the straw poll here, but just in general, you're asking that question.
Well, those were the top three issues.
Well, yeah, but I think here there is no sense. I mean, when you look at the list of issues and you look at all of the issues that individuals could have identified as their priorities. I mean, you've got spending, you've got Obamacare, you've got judicial nominees, you've got immigration, you've got Second Amendment, balanced budget, tax relief, education, all of those issues that are very prominent and even prominently discussed here this weekend. But yet, the three that were honed in on, religious liberty, number one, the life issue, number two, and marriage, number three. So I would read into that the value voters are not backing away from natural marriage in any form or fashion. In fact, we talked about this internally, and it's difficult at this point almost to separate marriage from religious freedom. The two have become so intertwined, and so I would argue that probably is at the forefront of concern, as we have seen even saw here this weekend, of what happens to businesses and individuals who take a public stand for natural marriage based upon their religious convictions. Yes.
Yes, did anything surprise you about these results? Or a second question about the confidence in general, I mean, as you've been playing over the months and the issues that were discussed here, any surprises when you deal with those two things?
Not really. No, well, I would just say I would have thought that maybe national security would have been higher in the priorities, but we take the top three priorities. But again, we're talking value voters. I think I'm not sure, I'll have to go back and look historically, but I'm not sure that we've ever had an issue where nearly 40% of the people, that's a large portion of attendees, zeroed in on one issue as their top concern. That's pretty significant, I think, that 40% are saying religious liberty and religious freedom is a top concern. So I think that's probably the thing that was most significant to me. Other than that, I mean, these things are moving. They're putting together the Values Voter Summit is very fluid. And I found that contrary to what we're hearing around the country, and I'm not saying it's not true, but this week was really kind of a contrast of what I have seen as I've been in some of these key states where Senate races are taking place, and some of the reports we're hearing about a lack of enthusiasm among conservative voters. I don't think it's the voters that lack enthusiasm. I think it's just they need something to be enthused about, and you give them something that they can believe in and connect with, and they're ready to go. And I think it really comes down more to a candidate problem than it does a voter problem. Anyone else? I can take another question. If anybody has another question. Well, I want to thank you all for participating and being a part of the Value Voter Summit from the standpoint of reporting on it. I think this is a very important, significant segment of the voting population. And as we have seen, Republicans cannot be successful without an engaged value voter constituency. And again, our goal is to see what I think has been a mistake in the past two election cycles corrected, to where a candidate will connect with his voting base and make them a part of a winning coalition so that America can get good, responsible leadership again. So thank you for being here.